Good morning, students. Welcome to eSuvidya. Hope you all are fine and safe. Students, in the previous class, we have discussed about Biju Patnaik and his adventure. Biju Patnaik was a born daredevil and a risk taker. He was a symbol of courage, bravery and adventure, and this part of his nature has remained in his life as a pilot and a politician. Students, what the brave horse Chetak was to Rana Pratap, the Dakotas were same to Biju Patnaik. And how Biju Patnaik got his first Dakota was also a story of bravery, courage and adventure. Students, by then Biju Patnaik had started Bhubaneswar Flying Club, and Second World War was over and a lot of Dakotas were lying unused at the American Air Base or airport at Panagarh near Kolkata. And Biju wanted to purchase a Dakota for his Bhubaneswar Flying Club, and he was just about to fly to Panagarh to buy or to purchase a Dakota when some of his friends rose near him and asked him not to fly because a severe storm is developing. But Biju don't pay any attention to their words, and without bothering, he told, "This is Biju's plane which flies during the storm." And he took up to Panagarh, and he, with great difficulty, he repaired a Dakota and returned back to Bhubaneswar. And most of his adventures were with his Dakotas. Students, as we have discussed, when the Pakistan forces started marching towards Kashmir in 1947, Biju Patnaik first dropped the first regiment of Indian soldiers at the Srinagar airport, and also he supplied necessary things to the Indian soldiers or necessary things to the soldiers. And in the same year, when Indonesia was witnessing an intense freedom struggle, and when then President of Indonesia Sukarno asked Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the Prime Minister of India, for assistance, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru asked Biju Patnaik to come to their rescue. And Biju Patnaik, in a secret mission, flew to Indonesia, and he successfully rescued the Indonesian Prime Minister Dr. Sahriar and Vice President Muhammad Hatta from the Dutch captivity, when the Dutch planes are flying everywhere, are flying in order to shut his plane or shut his Dakota down. So still Biju Patnaik never cared to this, as he was a born daredevil and a risk taker. He flew to Indonesia in order to rescue the Indonesian leaders. And in this successful mission, his wife Gyan Patnaik, who was also a pilot, accompanied him. So for this greatest contribution to the Indonesia's freedom struggle, he was awarded Bhumiputra, or Son of the Soil Award, by the Indonesian government. Until today, the government of Indonesia keeps a Dakota as a respect to the leader Biju Patnaik. Students, up to this portion we have discussed in the previous class. Let's see that how Biju Patnaik regarded his Dakotas as living beings, and how he has developed a strong attachment with his Dakotas, and what he has said to Mr. VIII, who was doing research, who did research on Biju Patnaik and his Dakotas. Let's read. This is what Biju Patnaik himself told about one of his daredevil experiences with his Dakotas to Mr. VIII, who did researches on Biju and his Dakotas. One day Biju was inside the cockpit of one of his Dakotas and was about to fly up. A ground staff rushed to him and said, "Sir, something is leaking from the aircraft." Biju did not bother to get down and was still in the cockpit. He ordered the ground staff, "Get me some of the leaking things." The ground staff brought some. Biju tested the liquid and took up. Probably Biju must have consulted his Dakota in this regard at the time, as he considered them as living beings, and his Dakota must have told him, "Nothing, let's go." So students, as we have discussed that Biju Patnaik was a born daredevil and he was a risk taker, and this is what he shared one of his adventure with Mr. Dhir, who did research on Biju Patnaik and his Dakotas. Once Biju Patnaik or Biju Babu was in the cockpit. Cockpit means the pilot cabin of an aircraft. Cockpit means the pilot cabin of an aircraft. So once Biju Babu was in the pilot cabin of an aircraft or cockpit of an aircraft, and he was just about to fly, when suddenly a ground staffs are employed by the airlines for maintenance of the aircrafts. Okay, so a ground staff rushed near Biju Babu and told him that something is leaking. Okay, something or some liquid substances is leaking. So when the ground staff told this to Biju Patnaik that something is leaking from the aircraft, then without being worried, Biju Babu remained in the cockpit and he asked the ground staff to bring some of the leaking substances. So now the ground staff brought some leaking substances, some liquid substances to Biju Babu, and he tested it. After testing it and after examining it, he then flew up. So probably Biju Babu must have consulted with his Dakotas regarding this, because Biju Babu regarded the Dakotas as living beings, and he has developed a strong emotional bond with his Dakotas. And as Rana Pratap has developed a strong emotional bond with his horse Chetak, so also Biju Babu has developed a strong and emotional bond with his Dakotas, and he regarded the Dakotas as living beings. So before flying up, he probably must have consulted with his Dakota, and he must have consulted with his Dakotas, and his Dakota must have told, "Nothing to worry, let's fly," or "Nothing to bother, nothing, let's go, nothing, let's go." That means his Dakota must have assured him, "Nothing to bother, let's go." So this is what about Biju Babu and his Dakotas, and how he has developed a strong emotional bond with his Dakotas, and how he regarded his Dakotas as living beings. Okay, so when the ground staff rushed near Biju Babu and asked him about the leaking substances, Biju Babu never worried. Even he never get down from the cockpit. He remained in his cockpit without being bothered. Without bothering about the leaking substances, he remained in the cockpit, and he asked the ground staff to bring some liquid substances or leaking substances, to bring the leaking substances. And when the ground staff brought, then Biju Babu examined it, tested it, and he flew up. That means Biju Babu must have consulted his Dakotas. Probably Biju Babu must have consulted his Dakotas about the leaking substances, and his Dakota must have told. Okay, as we have discussed, Biju Babu must have consulted his Dakota about the leaking substance, and his Dakota must have told to him, "Nothing to worry, nothing, let's go." So his Dakota must have assured him about the safety. Okay, must assured Biju Babu about the safety and security of him, because Biju Babu regarded his Dakotas as living beings. So this is about Biju Babu and his Dakotas. With the Dakotas, he developed a strong emotional bond and he regarded the Dakotas as living beings. This is the theme of the last part of this chapter, Biju Patnaik and his Dakotas. Students, let's find out some new words from this portion and try to use the new words into meaningful sentences of our own. The first word is cockpit. The first word is cockpit. Cockpit means pilot cabin. Pilot cabin, or the small closed space where the pilot sits in an aircraft. Let's use it into a meaningful sentence. Pilots perform other duties along with time spent in the cockpit. Along with time spent in the cockpit. So pilots perform other duties along with the time spent in the cockpit. Next word is, students, ground staff. Ground staff. Ground staff is noun. The people, ground staff meaning the people employed by an airline who work in an airport, rather than on board an aircraft. Students, you see that ground staff are those persons who are employed by an airline who work in an airport. Ground staffs work in an airport rather than on board an aircraft. Okay, so the ground staffs never remain on board of an aircraft, but they work in an airport. They work in an airport and they never, or rather than on board an aircraft. Okay, so ground staffs are what? The people employed by an airline who work in an airport rather than on board an aircraft. So let's use it in a meaningful sentence. He formerly used to work as ground staff with Air India. Air India. Okay, he formerly used to work as ground staff with Air India. So students, the last word is leaking. Next word is leaking. Leaking, the original verb is leak. Students, means escaping of liquid or gas. Escaping of a liquid or gas. Let's use it into a meaningful sentence. Water was leaking from the pipe. Water was leaking from the pipe. Or let's use it into another meaningful sentence. Oil leaked out of the car. Oil leaked out of the car. So students, today we have completed the chapter Biju Patnaik and his Dakotas. You read this lesson thoroughly and try to answer the comprehension questions of your own. Thank you. Have a nice day. See you in the next class.